Some is obviously about heat, it's about air conditioners, and you've got an ideologically driven government in Canberra that do not understand that without the reliable and relatively inexpensive involvement of coal as a primary component of our energy mix, the nation and its businesses would grind to a halt. In New South Wales, there is no way New South Wales can rely on wind and solar as they've relied on coal for more than a century. We're about to see the damaging consequences of blind ideological commitment to net zero. How many years now have I been warning of this national economic suicide note? If CSIRO are to be our national science agency, why is it that they have never revealed the energy efficiency, that is, how much energy in to get so much energy out for solar and wind farms? Some scientific studies say that the efficiency of renewables is about the same as the burning of wood. So that's going back hundreds of years. But for Bowen to say that renewables are the cheapest form of energy is absolute rubbish. And of course, he will be buried in his own rubbish. But of course, increased energy costs increase inflation and jack up interest rates and reduce productivity. Remember last week when I spoke to Senator Matt Canavan, we discussed the case that the federal government is facing in the federal court, defending a case brought by the two Torres Strait Islanders who argue that they deserve damages because the government hasn't done enough about this so-called climate change. And you might recall that the government's solicitor's defence, amongst other things, was that Australia, quote, lacks the necessary control to prevent or materially mitigate climate change or its impact. And the solicitor further argued, quote, there's a lack of precise quantitative studies and that the government doesn't have, quote, the necessary control to prevent or materially mitigate climate change. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the solicitor for the government is saying the government can't do anything about climate change. I mean, you haven't read about that anywhere other than here. Nothing has been reported about this. But they're all in it together, and they're all wrong. The fear and alarmism is frightening the tripe out of kids that the world will end and it's not worth living because of climate change. And because of all of this, Malcolm Turnbull gave us Snowy 2.0, another diabolical disaster. It was in April last year that AGL Energy and Snowy Hydro questioned the problems about Snowy Hydro too, I might add, questioned the blueprint for the so-called electricity grid. They argued that the assumptions used to model fast coal plant retirements were flawed. Now, these two power giants, AGL Energy and Snowy Hydro, questioned the modelling and warned that the way we were going threatened the prospect of increased blackouts. Earlier in December 21, the Australian Energy Market Operator released a plan which argued that coal was being removed from Australia's electricity system up to a decade earlier than should be the case, and that we would need a 9-fold increase in wind and solar by 2050 to meet net zero targets. Bowen ignored all of that, but coal continues to provide 70% plus of our current electricity capacity. To all of that and to meet the climate change hoax, add Malcolm Turnbull's Snowy 2.0. It was going to sustain electricity supplies when intermittent renewables failed to deliver. Ignore the global trends, I might add, which shows that a shortfall of energy once coal is sidelined is occurring everywhere. But no, Bowen and Albanese know everything. Renewables at their peak today, when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, are about 30%. To meet Labor's ideological obsession, they want all our energy in 7 years to be 82% renewable. It is laughable in its stupidity. Paul Broad ran Snowy Hydro, but resigned shortly after Labor won office. He said that the Albanese government would not be able to meet the target of Australia producing 82% of its electricity supplies from renewable sources by 2030. He described Labor's green energy plan as bullshit. Well, Snowy Hydro 2.0 is a complex engineering project. It aims to put a new underground power station in a remote corner of the Snowy Mountains to shore up the nation's electricity supply. Now, this is deep underground, as you can see from the pictures there, building a tunnel that has to pass through 5 different types of rock, 3 major fault zones and 5 rivers and creeks. They've got to drill a tunnel 8 metres high and 8 metres wide just to assess the rock type. Now, the station and its turbines would be housed in an enormous cavern drilled out of the rock 850 metres below the surface of the Kosciuszko National Park. I mean, who dreamt this stuff up?